11 meters. CB radio. Yes, a video on CB radio. Why? Because I want to. Because I think there's a lot of people that would like to see it. If it wasn't for CB radio, I wouldn't be here today as a ham radio operator. It's kind of like my gateway drug into amateur radio, and it may be for you. But regardless of what you think, there are a lot of people that are buying and using CB radios today as you watch this video. I'm not lying to you. It is fact. Somebody that might be lying to you is an old-time ham that's been doing ham radio for many years that tells you he's never played with CB radio before. He might be the liar. 11 meters is what got me where I am, and I started that way back when I was 9 years old. In fact, my 10th birthday present from my dad was a Cobra 29 LTD Classic, and it's exactly what I have here. I have a lot of little things I could show you about where this came from in the CB days. I wasn't around in those days, but I can give you an insight on where it started from, how it progressed, and my time in CB started around the mid or early 90s. And I could even show you some cool things like illegal CB amplifiers. That's right, I got a few of them in my closet. I'm not afraid to say it. So we're going to check out CB radio. We're going to show you a little bit of the things in between. And if you're new to radio or you're thinking about radio, this may be your stepping stone into amateur radio because it is radio and it used to be a ham band. So let's get into 11 meters.
HamRadioConcepts. The place to come for amateur radio videos.
Now, as I said, this radio right here is not the exact one I had when I was a kid because I don't know where that one went. But this is the exact radio model that I had, a Cobra 29 LTD Classic. One of the most famous and most solid CB radios you can get. But I have several little CBs hidden around here. And if it wasn't for CB radio, for 11 meters, I probably would have never been a little tech radio junkie. I was 9 years old and I had a broken Audio Vox 23 channel AM crystal controlled CB radio, kind of like the one you see in this picture here. And I remember that it really didn't work and it wouldn't work. I couldn't get it to work, but I was already experimenting. I had my soldering iron at 9 years old. My dad would always solder stuff. And my 10th birthday, I really asked my dad for a CB radio, and he got it from a pawn store in Melbourne, Florida, and brought it home with a little gel cell battery, and we put a little antenna outside the window, and away I went. 10 years old. I was talking to people on CB radio locally. Now, when you're 10 years old talking on the CB, you know, it's probably not the best thing for a 10-year-old sometimes with the language or maybe the people that have adult conversations, whatever. But regardless of the fact, it didn't, you know, scar me as an adult because I was on 11 meters at 10 years old, but it gave me the knowledge to start playing and see how propagation worked. You know, we're going to go into all this. If for somebody who's never seen my channel, my name is Eric and I'm an FCC licensed amateur radio operator. I play with ham radios like your grandpa used to have 50 years ago on top of the house with the rotating beams and stuff. Yeah, I got stuff like that. And a lot of my followers already have stuff like that. But CB radio is something that whenever you bring it up on, when you're talking to guys on the ham band, a lot of times you hear, oh, CB, no, we don't talk about chicken band, children's band, redneck band, trucker band, whatever you want to call it. It's ridiculous for you to make up your own name on why you call it that. If you don't like it, why are you going to trash it for somebody else? Maybe they want to play on CB radio. You have no right to call it some chicken band, but we're going to go on a tangent here, so bear with me. So 11 meters, you know, it has a big history behind it because of what's been on there. But when you boil it down into a pot here, it's the same thing. It's radio. It's communicating with radio waves that can propagate across the United States and all that, which they used to call skip and DX and all that kind of stuff. But that can happen. So let's first go take a little trip for a few seconds back into where the CB band came from and how long ago this has been around. because I don't script anything when I make videos, I'll just show you a reference here on the Wikipedia site for a couple things to talk about, and you can go and learn more about 11 meters on the internet. Now, way back to 1945 that the FCC began to permit citizens band for public communications, personal or family general radio service for the general public. Now, back in the day, it was originally 460 to 470 UHF band, and that wasn't really practical for the price point and the radio technology and stuff. So along came Al Gross, and he was the pioneer for establishing Citizens Band. He wanted to make handhelds for the general public to use, and that anybody can quickly get a license simply, not as elaborate as a ham license back in the day, but he could manufacture and pioneer this technology for the average user to get a Citizens Band handheld and use radio to communicate. And this is a 7 transistor super heterodyne transceiver. Check this thing out. This is one of my little neat toys in the closet. I got this from Patrick, KI4LUY, who really got me started in ham radio once we met on the CB. So there you go. I met Patrick, the Elmer to all my great ham radio stuff, on the CB years ago when I was about 19. And down the road he said, hey, I have one of these from back in the day. Now this was a crystal controlled, so in the back here you put different crystals for different frequencies, and ran on a 9-volt battery. It had the real long antenna, and I have a couple of these. I have another one, I gotta find it, but this one's in the box. So imagine back in the day, as a citizen with a license on the CB, you could talk to your friends and family on a radio like this. Now, this one was only, I think, 400 milliwatts, so it wasn't very much power, but the authority to have your own radio on 27 megahertz with a license back in the day was really a cool thing. So we fast forward a little bit to the 1970s, and CB was on fire. I wasn't alive yet, but I know stories from my parents, from my friends, and from a lot of hams that used CB back in the day. The 1973 oil crisis imposed a 55 mile an hour speed limit across the nation, and that's when truck drivers really got into CB, because back then you didn't have cell phones. And back then there was a Smokey, as they call the state troopers or the highway patrol. They were on the sides of the road shooting radar trying to bust people, over the speed limit. So the truck drivers who were on the road constantly adopted the CB radio in a day where there is no cell phones and apps to communicate with fellow truck drivers across the nation as they travel. Here's a fun fact. I have a CB radio in my work vehicle currently because I'm on the road a lot for work. And I can tell you this, hands down, your phone, your apps, your OnStar doesn't hold a candle to what the truck drivers on the road every day know. They know more about the roads before you even get it on the app. Those truck drivers are the most informed on where the police are hanging out behind those guardrails, where the best route is to take around that traffic jam, and you'll know miles before that traffic jam listening to other drivers on CB radio. I use the term truck drivers all the time with CB, but that's not really what it is. There are a lot of enthusiasts on CB that travel or even at their house with base stations that use CB every day. But the truck drivers, hands down, you guys watching this video that drive trucks, I envy you. You know a lot and you have a long road ahead of you, but you keep us informed on the CB radio, and I thank you. This app on my phone, garbage. We can both imagine that in the 70s, CB radio was on fire. Everybody had one. This interest and explosion of popularity has made everybody get a radio, and with the 23 channels that were originally allocated, you were probably hard-pressed to find a channel that was free because everybody was on there. So in 1977, the U.S. allocated the new 40-channel band plan, which included those 23 channels with an additional 17, a 40-channel band plan from 26.965 megahertz to 27.405. You could still use your 23-channel radio, but if you had somebody on channel 32, well, you were SOL. It allowed manufacturers to make more radios with more channels, and the interest grew even more. And at the same time in the 70s, it was so hot, Betty Ford, the former First Lady of the United States, used the CB handle First Mama. Everybody had handles. My dad's handle was Frustration, my mom's handle was Big Bertha, my grandfather's handle was Silver Fox, and mine at 10 years old was Snake Eyes, and that stuck with me for a while until my dad passed away about 10 years ago. And if I get on the CB, I just use Frustration if anybody asks. But look at this, voice actor Mel Blanc also used Bugs, or Daffy as his handle, talking on the air in Los Angeles area in one of his many voice characters. Can you imagine talking to Mel Blanc on the CB and he's Marvin Martian on one end in one conversation and Bugs Bunny on the other? That would be pretty fun, you know? So CB was on fire. At the same time, the original FCC output limitation was 5 watts DC input to the final amplifier stage, which basically meant 4 watts out of the back of the radio when you get into technical calculations of it. 4 watts was all we were licensed for. And technically, yeah, 4 watts is still what the legal limit is. But in this day, there were so many people that were so hyped up on radio, everybody wanted more power. Everybody wanted to talk farther. Everybody wanted someone to hear them. Introduce the CB radio amplifiers. Now here's a couple little goodies out of my closet. Here's a couple CB radio amplifiers. Some of the country folk call it linears or linear amplifiers. Some call it foot warmers. Some say you plug it in and walk the dog and kick the cat, whatever. Here's an older one that I have. This is a Texas Star DX350. Texas Star made a lot of amplifiers back in the day and still make them, but with the regulations, they call them 10 meter or CW transmitters. But basically, this is they call it a 350 watt amp. You can put 4 watts in from an AM radio on CB, get about 175, 225 out. This one over here is a Cobra XL350. You might have not seen too many of these. I'm not sure Cobra ever made this. If they did, please leave a comment in the description if you're familiar with this. Again, XL350. Both of these have two 2879 Toshiba red dots, two SC2879. Both of these work, and these are what people used. You see on the back here, it's like any old amplifier if you're a ham. Transmitter in, antenna out, boom. You know, these were designed, they were illegal too, mind you. They are illegal to use on the 11 meter band. Now people somewhere out there still use these. These are only 2 out of many, many. People do use these on 10 meters for the hams that are watching. You can actually use this on 10 meters. I've done it before. Low drive, got about 150, 200 watts out on a little QRP rig and sounded just fine. Now they're not spectrally pure. They don't put out a very clean signal like a 7300 would or like a Meritron amplifier. But the name of the game was Class C. Class C was not much, not really linear, and just pump out your power. Some of them had receive preamps on here. Both of these do. That would give you a little bit better receive, but it would also bring the noise in. And with going from 4 watts to 200 made a huge difference. Huge difference. That would make people all over 95 or people on other channels like Super Bowl 6 if you're a CBer. There's a Mach 200. That is an old tube style CB amplifier that gives you 5 watts in, roughly 150 out. A lot of the older amps were tube driven or tube amplifiers, so that one's a lot bigger, but that one I'm not taking all my stuff out to show you. Just showing you a couple solid state jobs like this. And also they would use stuff like power amplifiers. So, or power mics, excuse me. So the power mics, this one has echo on it and it gives you more modulation, which would increase your output on these things by just being loud and obnoxious. It would essentially push out more power. But for those who are in CB right now, I'm pretty sure you know what these are. For those that have never seen a CB, I'm not telling you to go out and look for an amplifier to buy. But the reality of the fact on my channel and me as a amateur radio operator, these are in use everywhere. So please send all your negative hate mail and bashing to my comment section below the video. But more or less, a lot of CB users did use and own amplifiers for the 11 meter band. Some other fun fact, so here is a old Browning, LTD by Browning, 23 channel crystal controlled CB. This is 23 channels with upper and lower sideband, and this is actually going to be my 10 meter beacon. Video coming on that soon because I did burn out my Yaesu FT450 that I had on a 10 meter beacon. So this is easily modified with different crystals and some other tuning to modify on 10 meter amateur band for a beacon. And this is a newer model of a 40 channel. Now this is an older Cobra, but they still manufacture this radio. So the difference, channels, but the similarity between both of these, is every person in this day is tuning, tweaking, peaking, and diddle sticking these radios. This is a 4-watt CB, but this is not a 4-watt CB anymore. Back in the day, I did do a little bit of modification on this. For RF gain knob is now a variable power knob, and my CBPA switch is now a Roger beep, which is a noise toy as they call it. And it does have different finals that I put in it. Now I don't even remember doing all this, but they have all different kinds of mods for radios like that. You know, people have used ones like these and have modified them and tweaked the power output to exceed the legal limit of 4 watts. Is anybody knowing? Not really. Should you go out there and do that? No, I'm not telling you to do that, but it's happening. This is reality, folks. People are using Cobra 29s that are pushing out 30 watts with an amplifier that's making it 250. It is happening. That's what you're hearing on 11 meters today. CB radio wasn't just for mobile applications. There were a lot of 11 meter base station transmitters that were made. One that I'd love to get my hands on one day is a Browning Golden Eagle, the Mark III. The Browning Golden Eagle is one of the most awesome and loudest base stations you can get back in the day. These things still go for quite a penny. I've never had one, I've never owned one, but they always had that legendary ping every time you keyed up the microphone, and you knew someone was on a Browning, because not only the audio quality and the signal, but man, it just, you know, with the D104, the astatic microphones, the audio was just pounding in. And there are still people on, and here's a fun fact for you, Channel 6, they call Super Bowl 6. You got all those guys with Brownings and all kinds of amplifiers. Man, it's hard to get a conversation on there if you ain't got 5,000 watts, I can tell you that. That is just booming. But there were a lot of CB base stations. One that rings a bell, and I'll show you one that I have, but one that rings a bell that my dad always talked about. He said that thing would just light him up. It was a Lafayette HG20D. I remember the name, and there it is right there. That's what my dad had, and he always said it was on top of the refrigerator. He would call my mom at the time. This would be at the house, and my mom would use this, and he'd be in the mobile, and he'd talk back to home in the 70s and 80s and whenever. But he said this was the radio, and of course you can get in there as well and, you know, change some tubes or tweak it out, you know, do some things. Then if you had a old tube style amplifier to go behind this thing, you'd really have some power. We'll get into antennas shortly. But the Lafayette was another manufacturer back in the day, and this was one that my dad had. Boy, I'd love to have my hands on one of these. Here's another oldie but goodie. So I wanted to pick this up years ago because I heard my dad had a Lafayette HG20D. This is the Lafayette Telsat 924, 23 channel tube radio. I haven't turned it on in a long time, but I do have the mic and the mobile mounting bracket. Look at that. But this was another base station from back in the day. I'm not sure of the conditions of the tubes at this time, and again, it's AM only, but you could get in there and change a couple of crystals and have different frequencies. You know, back in the day, if you wanted, you can assign the channel bank for 22 with a different crystal to be on 31 or 38 or wherever. But that is a Lafayette I haven't turned on in a long time, but maybe one day I'll get to restoring this, and for old time's sake, I will get on the air on my Lafayette, and I will work some skip land. So let's talk about antennas for a second. We've talked a lot about the radios and where it came from, but we're going to move into the current situation of 11 meters. For those who are wondering and want to get into CB radio, the rest of this video should help you out on the current situation. We're going to talk about antennas for a second. Antennas is by far the most important thing for your CB radio system, for better receive, better transmit, and the same thing goes with ham radio. You got all kinds of guys that are going and dumping thousands into amplifiers, and they're dumping thousands into radios, but they got a crappy antenna, the wired G5RV, and they expect that that's going to be the best thing they ever have, and they're let down very poorly on band conditions. So antennas, that's a very important thing. Let me show you outside what I have as far as a base station antenna, and I'll show you what I have for a mobile antenna. Then I'll go through several other options about antennas. Then we'll talk about the propagation of the band, how it works, and what you could expect to find in different portions of the band, so you have a little more knowledge on the 27 megahertz band. So in my backyard, this is what's called a super penetrator. This is made by High Gain. We're looking at the one here in the forefront. This is a 10 through 12 meter antenna. So what I'm using this for, this is a antenna that's designed originally in the 70s as a CB base station antenna. You can see it's got the radials for your counterpoise on the bottom, like that, okay? And electrically, it's the right appropriate length for the 27 megahertz frequency. Now, I'm using this on 28 megahertz because that's the ham portion of the antenna that I'm using. But this was developed by High Gain years ago in the 70s as one of the best 11 meter antennas, CB base station antennas. This will handle several hundred watts, maybe up to 1,000 watts. And why they ever marketed antennas that were available to use at 1,000 watts when you only had 4 gives the inclination that they knew everybody was using amplifiers. Now, something like this, for those who don't know, this one over here is actually my ham radio antenna. Now you can see this one's a little more elaborate up there. This one has multiple band capabilities. You got the rope on there to tie it off. But this one does a lot more frequencies from 3.6 to 30 megahertz, whereas this one here is only really suitable 24 to 28 megahertz, depending on how you tune it. Now, you don't have to have one of these to get on CB. You can have any kind of antenna that'll be suitable for 27 megahertz, but the better antenna means the better signal. You can have 10,000 watts, but if you don't have a good antenna that it's going into, you're not doing yourself any good. There are a lot of manufacturers on antennas, but quite frankly, one of the most popular CB antennas was the Solarcon Antron 99. The A99 is used also by hams, don't let them fool you, for 10 meter ham antennas, as well as with a tuner down to 20 meters. But this High Gain here has a history on it. And the Antron 99, which I don't have, was made out of fiberglass, where this is made out of aluminum. And this is one idea of what a CB antenna would look like. This is about 16 feet across, and it's about, 21 feet up. Now here's what you would have for a little mobile one. Now this is a mobile magnet mount antenna by Wilson. This is the little Will, and I'm using this again on 28 megahertz because I have it tuned differently. But this is a very popular mobile magnet mount antenna. Comes with the coax and everything that you would put on your vehicle. It sticks right on the metal of the car, and it would give you 27 megahertz or 28, depending on how you tune it, like myself. And this is basically taking that same antenna I have out in the back, and it's compromising it into a smaller form by winding all the extra length of wire in the base of the antenna. So physically in the air, you only have about 3.5 feet of antenna in the air. Will it tune on 27 megahertz? Yes, but is it more efficient than the one out back? Absolutely not. So this one is more of a compromise for a mobile antenna, but the best kind of mobile antenna you can really use is a 102-inch stainless steel whip antenna. Here's just one I pulled on Amazon, wherever. But a 102-inch antenna for CB is electrically a quarter wave length of that frequency. So there's no compromise here. There's no coil, there's no shrunken size, there's no, compromised size to fit it on your vehicle. Granted, it is pretty long and it whips around and waves around, but with a suitable mount and a 102-inch whip, this is a full quarter wave length antenna. It's the same thing electrically as my little Wilson mag mount out there, but you get more antenna in the air. That's the ticket. The more metal in the air, the better. So you can get one that's 5 wavelengths electrically that's shrunken down into a 3-foot fiberglass stick, but it's not going to be as good as a whip like this. Now, myself, if I wanted to use this on 28 megahertz, I would start nipping off a little bit of the antenna. There's certain places that you can tune this thing and shorten it, and that would be a full quarter wave length on 28 megahertz. But once you cut some off, you can't add any, really. You could, but that's the way that works. So sometimes there's an adjuster, and you can loosen it with an Allen screw, not on the whip here, but on certain antennas, like the mag mount you saw outside. I can loosen the adjuster and pull the whip up or down, and that'll make it physically longer or shorter to tune it in the portion of the band that I need. But the 102-inch whip for mobile, not as good as a base antenna. You don't want to really invest in buying one of these and putting it on a mount outside when you can find an Antron for just a few bucks more and have a better, longer antenna. Now the Antron is a half wave, so it's I think it's half wave or 5/8 wave, so it's a longer antenna. It's got more gain than a quarter wave like this, and it is fiberglass, so it's a little more rigid outside, but you'd have to have a higher mount and a lot more room to put a Antron outside. But that's what you really want, is a bigger antenna for a base. Could you get away with one of these at your home if you can't put a big antenna? Absolutely. You sure? The higher the better. Remember this in CB. Height equals might. So I'll give you a little insight on how this propagation works, and the band edges, and what you'd find, and what times of day and night and season is best for CB radio. Now, on my channel, if you've never seen this before and you have just stumbled across this, I do have a video on each and every ham band, 10 meters, 12 meters, 20 meters, 40 meters, telling you the band characteristics, the band edges, what you'd expect to find there, and it teaches you about each and every band. You can watch that series and watch one after the other and learn about all the different ham bands. But we're going to focus on this little slice of 27 megahertz, 11 meters, and I'll show you about what the band entails and how it propagates. And yes, you can work worldwide contacts on 11 meters. To the newcomer to the channel and this video, you may not know what ham radio is or what CB radio is. So what you're looking at here is a chart that I've referenced on other videos that we use as amateur radio operators to see the different band allocations per frequency. Now this is from the ARRL, that's the Amateur Radio Relay League, and they show all the US licensed amateur radio bands. However, you don't see 11 meters on here, or CB radio, because it's not an amateur radio band anymore. Hasn't been for 50-something years. So it's not on this list. So I don't have a fancy chart to show you where or what 11 meters looks like, as you would see these. But you keep hearing me saying meters, for those who are new. Then the term meters is just basically the wavelength of the frequency. And generally, the lower the frequency, the longer the wavelength. So 10 meters is roughly 28 to 29 megahertz. 12 meters is 24 megahertz. So in between, you have 11 meters, which is around 27.4, 27.2, right around there. And that's not on here. So you can see we have, as an amateur radio operator, we're licensed to use all these frequencies. That's kind of like a little push for you to get your amateur radio license. You know, you don't need a license for CB anymore, but you do to talk on all these. And you can check out my videos on each and every one of these bands. I go through and describe how it works, what it takes for an antenna, what you would hear on there, what times of day or year that it propagates. I mean, because think about this. Amateur radio, if you're on something like 7 megahertz, you're talking worldwide almost all the time, okay? This isn't something like you're hoping to catch a truck driver on 95. You're talking across the world on 30 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters. And in fact, my favorite of all these is 10 meters because I've used 5 watts and talked all over the world on ham radio. It's just something for you to look at in the future. But we're going to ignore this here for a second and go to this little chart that I found online. Now, because we have CB radio frequencies in the US, there are other countries that have it as well. You can see on this list here, there's about 40 channels in each column, and each column may represent different parts of the world. For instance, D, band D is ours here, and this goes from 26.965 to 27.405. That is our 40 channels on the US Citizens Band radio service. But you can see that you have band E, I know, is Brazil. So in Brazil and South America, they use these frequencies here. So what you're looking at also is there's more than 40 channels here. If you count these, you can see there's a 3A, a 7A, 11A. Those are what's considered alpha channels or able channels, okay? And to give you an idea, if you are a CBer and you didn't know this, you can count right here, 965, 975, 985, 995, 005, and so on. But sometimes it skips. For instance, down here, it will go 185, and then channel 19 is 185, but channel 20 is 205. There's 20 kilohertz difference there because there's a channel in between 19 able or 19 alpha. And these little channels in between are reserved for certain things like radio controlled vehicles that use 27 megahertz. I had a computer keyboard that worked on 27 megahertz. So they would put those frequencies in this band instead of having to license a whole nother band for their radio controlled cars or keyboards or baby monitors or whatever you have. They would stick it in between channels here. And that's why you see 3 alpha, 7 alpha, 11 alpha. So again, if you count sequentially, the channels will change, 6.5, 7.5, 8.5, and then 0.05 for channel 4, because there's a little channel in between called 3 alpha. There's a 7 alpha, 11 alpha, 15 alpha. I remember on certain radios, I had a Mirage back in the day. It was an export CB. It had all these frequencies on it. And with the click of a dial, you can switch between different bands here. It was made outside of the United States, so they didn't have to adhere to the US rules. But it had a button on there, and it was called the 10 kilohertz button, or the 10 kc shift, or the 19 able button, whatever you want to call it. And a traditional CB would go from 27.185 to 27.205. And if you had one of these radios, you had that little magic button that puts you in between. Now, were you really allowed to be on there? I mean, probably not, or maybe, unless you had a radio control car that was on 19 alpha. But you can hide from from your friends and be on the 2 in between and be on 195. And the only way you can get there is if you had a VFO, or a variable frequency oscillator, where you can scroll in between channels by frequency, or if you had that little button, the 19 able button. See, this is my ham radio. This is an ICOM 7300, and this does all the bands. But look, I can receive 11 meters, or CB, and if I had it modified, I could transmit there, but it's an amateur radio. But I can have a VFO here, and I can go anywhere in between, you see? Channel 19 would be right here, right? But I can go in between and go like this. So there I would be 19 alpha, all right? And with a VFO, you can go anywhere you want. But typically, CBs are channelized, so you get the channels that are in the radio unless you have a VFO like that where you can scroll around. Now, you may have heard somebody talking about skip. I worked some skip on CB today, or I'm hearing the skip roll in, or my dad used to say there was skip. What is skip? It's just another name as what we ham radio operators call propagation, band conditions, atmospheric conditions, sporadic E, tropoducting, whatever you want to call it for different bands. It's really just your signals skipping across through the atmosphere, or reflecting off the atmosphere. To give you an example, you have a station here. Let's say you were in West Virginia and someone was down here in South America and Brazil. You want to talk to this person, and you may think, well, that's impossible. I need millions of watts. Not really, because it's harder to talk to the guy 5 miles from you than it is to talk around the world. That's a little fun fact. So, in order for you to work that, you would be reflecting off of certain layers in the ionosphere. And you can see this is why they call it skip. Your signal here leaves and it travels 50, 70, 80, 100 miles, and then it starts going skyward with the bend of the earth and all that. It starts leaving the ground and going skyward. And depending on the atmospheric layer is what reflects your signal back to the earth. And you can see here now, you've just covered a great gap. You skipped over this whole section here. It's actually almost impossible to work 250, 300 miles with the average radio than it is to work across the world, unless you had a lot of power, a focused antenna and such. But you can see it skips right over that area here, and it depends on the layers of the atmosphere. So you can see this is, the daytime and the nighttime. You can see during the day you have a D layer, and during the day the F1 and the F2 are two separate layers. And the F2 is where your signals on a CB or 27 megahertz are reflecting off of during the day. And then at night, you lose the D layer, and the F1 and F2 combine. So it makes it harder at night, and during the day it's a lot easier. And with that being said, winter versus summer, it depends on the sunspots on the sun, and also with the layers of the atmosphere. The more spots on the sun, the more your signal is going to react with that F2 layer during the day. Sometimes, depending on how the atmospheric conditions are, these layers can stay there throughout the night, and sometimes they're there before you wake up in the morning. It just depends. But when we're talking about ham radio now, this happens almost every day for us with certain bands. 3.7 megahertz, that's every night. It's quieter in the winter, but every night the same guys get on and they work across the country to locals. They talk every day, every night, have their coffee. And with 7 megahertz, you got guys that are chasing rare contacts. You got guys that are on there every night. It's a nighttime band. Can happen during the day. But 11 meters, 27 megahertz CB, 10 meters, 28 megahertz, that's all grouped around daytime in the summer. You can have it at night, but your best time is April, May, June, July, August. You'll hear 27 megahertz open up alive, and you'll be even a mobile driving down the road on 19, and you'll hear trucks that are 500 miles north of you. They may be in Texas, and you're working them from your mobile driving down the highway. It's a beautiful thing. So you got Skip rolling in right now. You got Washington, D.C. and Delaware coming into Florida. It's about 6:29 p.m. The clock on my radio is not correct. But I've been monitoring all day. Now, you know, they're on channel 19, so I'm sure every trucker in the world hears them right now going up my area. But a little band opening in the... Okay, there's Cocoa Beach, Florida, about 50 miles up the road from me, talking to Washington, D.C. So there's a little bit of band conditions. You see how that signal's fading in and out? You can tell that they are working, Skip, because they're not solid. They're going up and down. So these guys might be working up and down the state or up and down the East Coast. Their signal's going in and out. You can tell that they're... See how it come up to S5 there? So the cool thing about this waterfall on this radio is I could see where the stations are in a given spectrum. I can see their little signals popping up. You see right up there? You can see some action. You can tell they're popping in there. And then you can go find them. And touch screen can go like this. I can pretty much tune right to them. Oh, there it is. Super Bowl 6, Channel 6. This is where the big guns hang out. You ain't got 5K, you gone.
Counting and love and golden numbers in the new coming new year. I hope to do it all again on 27.025. Oscar, make sure you let them know that 031.
Oh, what'd you hear? You heard a Browning Golden Eagle, didn't you?
Mr. So-and-so, Northeast Corner, back line.
There it is.
I need no invitation, man. Hey, Oscar, my name is Mr. So-and-so. I'm the CEO of the Sneaky Pete Nation. You looking in the Northeast Corner, you looking in me. Hello, Oscar, Mr. So-and-so is back quiet.
Oh, man. And you can see there's other stations down here. Look at this. They're down here somewhere. Just saw them on the waterfall. There's 6.
I want to say God bless you, and may God continue on keeping you. I want to say may God bless you, and may God always keep you. 2019 Oscar, Mr. So-and-so, back line.
Now, how do you get mad for a guy just wishing you best wishes for 2019 and God save you? How do you get mad at that? With his brown and golden eagle getting on down. Back in the day, the place to order CB radio stuff was Copper Electronics. Now, I haven't ordered from here in probably 13 years, but I have ordered before. In fact, back then, I used to order in bulk, and I'd sell them to some friends. But this is, there's not too many CB stores anymore. You don't want to go, if you're going to be a CB enthusiast, you do not want to go to Walmart and get the Cobra 19 DX4. It's just junk, okay? It's not made the way it is. If you're going to be an avid CB operator and you want to actually take part in this hobby and sound like those guys that you hear on there. Copper Electronics has a lot of stuff here. They have export radios, they have amps, they have stuff like that. Now, if I just go, and there's a lot of places on YouTube, people are making videos and they're advertising their shop and showing you how they're tweaking radios and stuff. I have never ordered from those, and they didn't exist back in the day. When I was in CB, YouTube didn't exist. I wish it did. That would be awfully fun. But if I go to Copper, just click on mobile radios, because a lot of people use these mobiles as base radios. You can hook it up with a power supply in your house, a base station antenna, and you're good. You don't have to have a base station radio. Some of these newer ones, like the new Cobras, they have Bluetooth on them. Look, make and receive calls through your microphone. I mean, they got some cool technology in here. And Copper's got a good selection. Unfortunately, Midland decided to get out of the CBs, and they went into GMRS. Whole nother video coming, but it's another licensed service. CB, there is no license anymore, but GMRS is a whole different topic. They felt nobody was using CBs anymore. I think they're highly wrong. Cobra's still making it. United's still making it. Here's a nice one that has always been a staple, the Cobra 148 GTL. It's got sideband on it. That was always a great rig. You could always find those used. Always a good rig. But they have a lot of stuff here. Look, they even have ham radios now, little Bowfungs. If you wanted to get into ham radio, they have 10-meter radios here. You have to have a license to purchase those. But for the video sake, the Bearcat 980 is another one that has sideband. Pretty good reviews on there. And Bearcat Uniden actually makes one with a scanner built in and Bluetooth and everything. But Cobra, you really can't go wrong. And I think, Galaxy is another one. But if I went to Galaxy, let's see. If I went, let's say, to this one, I wonder if they still give the options to, they used to, upon purchase, give you the option to peak it and tune it, align it, and do all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if they do that anymore, and there's plenty of stores that do that. But this tells you, this is a pretty nice CB radio. This is better than your average Cobra that you'd find at the store for sale. Another good place to go is truck stops. Always, truck stops have CB radios there. They always have antennas. They always have parts and accessories like microphones and antenna mounts and stuff like that. But Galaxy's always been a good one. Cobra's always been a good one. Even some of the unit ends are good. And then they got some microphones, bass microphones, mobile microphones to cut down the noise if you're in the mobile and you don't want all the road noise in the radio. But they also have, bass microphones. And all these have some bells and whistles. This one's got echo on it and stuff like that. If you want to be obnoxious. And, I'm not telling you we need to clean up CB. Go out there, have fun with it, man. That's what it's for. At this point, it's not a business band anymore. It's not a licensed band. It's to have fun. Can we have fun with radio, for Pete's sake? Do we have to treat it like it's zombie apocalypse? But hey, I got news for you. In the event of a natural disaster or a zombie apocalypse, CB is one of your quickest ways to get local information from others that are using CB as well. If you have the zombies knocking at your door and everybody's got a CB, you're good. I mean, if you have a ham radio license, even better. But they do have plenty of CB antennas here. They probably got stuff like the Moonrakers and all that kind of stuff that they used to have. Gizmochi, those are beams. They got 5-element beams, 6-element beams. Those will give you a lot more power. I think this used to be called the Moonraker. Something like this would give you a directional signal with a forward and a reflector, so you can aim that where you want, and you get a lot more gain out of the front of the antenna. So your 4 watts would turn into more watts with your gain. I mean, this says, power multiplication 21 times. In ham radio, we rate that differently, but this handles 2,000 watts. Now, why would they make a 2,000 watt antenna with a 4-watt radio? I think we've covered a lot of stuff here in this video. It's quite long, but you know what? I didn't even talk about half the stories that I have on CB. Here's the bottom line. It's radio. This is radio, okay? I have an amateur radio channel. I touch on a lot of things in videos that are relating to radio. CB is one of them. Don't let anybody tell you that you're not a real radio operator because you're not licensed, because you're on CB, which is full of a bunch of people that swear and don't ID and talk about stuff. I got news for you. That stuff happens on ham radio too. Half the time I'm disgusted going down in the lower bands of 75 meters, where a lot of the CBers migrated and got their license and continue to abuse a licensed service. But I don't say anything about it. Just the same way I don't say anything about CB radio. It's still radio. Go and learn how to build antennas. learn about CB and the way the signal propagates, learn about modifying and repairing and tweaking out your radio, you would understand more about what it's doing and what it's there for. This is a great video to explain some of the things to get you warmed up into CB radio, but I hope afterwards you subscribe to my channel, and I hope you follow along, because there's a lot of videos that you can learn from on my channel about other things that we do in ham radio, like sending pictures to and from over radio waves, GPS position reporting, taking a handheld, taking a picture and sending it through a repeater tower to somebody else across the county from a handheld. There's a lot of things that we do in this radio. It's all one big happy family. CB is not licensed, it's not an amateur radio band, but to me, it's still radio, and I'll always have that little piece of my heart of CB tucked away, listening to guys like this on the radio. It's just something that I've always liked, and without that, I would have never been where I am today with ham radio. So go out there, learn some things, share this video, subscribe, stay tuned to other videos, browse through my channel, check out some of the videos that I have on other things, and maybe that'll interest you. You can get your feet wet with minimal gear on CB. You don't have to get a license, and you can progress, and you can do the same thing also. You can look back and tell everybody, yeah, I was on CB, I learned a lot from it. Now I'm on amateur radio. It's just hopefully the way it works. 7-3, and that's the term we use on ham radio for best regards, kind regards, best wishes. 7-3 and a Happy New Year from KJ4YZI with Ham Radio Concepts.